Dorian, at 37 years old, was a man who understood the architecture of value. As a corporate analyst for Bank of America, working from the 51st floor of their eponymous tower in uptown Charlotte, his days were spent parsing spreadsheets that represented billions of dollars in assets. His own salary, a comfortable $145,000 a year, was a testament to his precision and his quiet, relentless diligence. He lived a life built on solid foundations, both financial and personal, or so he had believed. That foundation cracked on Christmas Eve not with a roar, but with a snide remark that slid into the warm, festive air of his in-laws' home, like a sliver of ice. The house, his sister-in-law's sprawling rental in Ballantine, was overstuffed with family, and the scent of honey-baked ham and roasting sweet potatoes. 18 people, a constellation of Amari's relatives, filled the space. Laughter echoed off the 10-foot ceilings. Dorian, in a simple gray cashmere sweater that cost a modest $250, felt a familiar, low-grade sense of being an outsider, an observer at a party he was technically co-hosting. He had paid for half of the catering, a $1,200 expense he'd covered without a second thought because it made his wife, Imari, happy. It was during the gift exchange when the Fisher appeared. Trevon, Imari's younger brother, a man whose ambition always seemed to outpace his follow-through, held up a bottle of cologne Dorian had given him, a $140 bottle of Creed Aventus he'd specifically requested. He grinned, a wide, performative flash of teeth. "Hey, everybody, look what Dorian got me," he announced, his voice carrying over the chatter. "Gotta thank my sister for this one. After all," he paused, locking eyes with Dorian across the room, "we all know you just live off my sister, man." The words, though delivered with a chuckle, were not a joke. They were a judgment, a public declaration. A few cousins tittered nervously. His mother-in-law, Melissa, offered a tight, unreadable smile. The other 10 or so relatives simply looked down at the wrapping paper in their laps, suddenly intensely interested in its crinkles. 18 pairs of eyes in that brief, searing moment either agreed, acquiesced, or refused to defend him. But only one person's reaction mattered. Dorian's gaze shifted to Imari. She was standing by the ridiculously oversized $800 rented Christmas tree, her elegant locks shimmering under the fairy lights. She was wearing a new $600 silk dress he'd bought her for the occasion. Her face was a perfect, beautiful blank. She didn't flinch. She didn't speak. She didn't even meet his eyes. She just took a delicate sip of her sparkling cider, the $40 bottle he'd picked up, and turned to comment on a new ornament. In the vacuum of her silence, Trevon's words solidified into fact. The air in the room changed. Dorian was no longer just Dorian, the quiet, steady husband. He was a caricature, a freeloader, a man propped up by the woman beside him. And the woman beside him had just co-signed the lie with her devastating, absolute inaction. He felt the blood drain from his face, a cold tide pulling away from his skin. He was still standing in a room full of people, but he had never felt so completely alone. He had no idea in that moment how deep that aloneness would need to become to save him. But a seed of cold, hard clarity was planted in the wreckage of that festive evening. He just wished he knew why it hurt so much. Was it the lie itself, or the fact that the 18 people in that room, people whose lives he had quietly and consistently supported, seemed to believe it? Have you ever had a moment where the world shifts under your feet, where you realize the story you've been living is a fiction? Share your story in the comments below, because sometimes knowing you're not alone is the first step toward finding solid ground again. The facade of their life together had been meticulously constructed, mostly by him. Dorian and Imari had been married for 6 years. They lived in his house, a charming 1940s bungalow in Myers Park that he had purchased and renovated for $450,000 2 years before he even met her. It was his single greatest asset, a quiet sanctuary on a tree-lined street, worlds away from the glass and steel of his office. Imari had moved in with her suitcases, her impressive collection of shoes, and an art history degree that led to a series of part-time, low-paying jobs at local galleries and museums. She currently made about $38,000 a year as a program coordinator for a small arts nonprofit. Dorian never cared about the income disparity. He loved her intelligence, her passion for culture, and the way she could light up a room. He saw his salary as a tool to build a beautiful life for both of them. Their domestic normalcy was a series of scenes he had curated and funded. Tuesday nights were for cooking together, him chopping vegetables with a practiced efficiency while she directed the recipe from a stool, a glass of $25 Pinot Grigio in her hand. They'd eat at the solid oak dining table he'd bought for $3,000 from a local craftsman, talking about their days. His was full of derivatives and risk analysis. Hers was about grant proposals and difficult artists. He paid the mortgage, a monthly check for $2,850. He paid the utilities, the property taxes, the insurance, another $1,100 a month. He covered their groceries, which, with Imari's preference for organic everything from Whole Foods, ran close to $1,000 a month. His 2021 Audi A6, a $60,000 car, was paid off. Her 2022 Lexus RX, a $55,000 SUV he'd put the $10,000 down payment on and co-signed the loan for, was her symbol of success. He never begrudged her this. He wanted her to feel successful. The financial support, however, didn't stop with their shared household. It bled, consistently and generously, into her family. Dorian, raised by a single mother who taught him that a man provides, saw it as his duty, his act of service. He became the unofficial family banker. He thought it was a sign of their respect and trust. He now saw it was something else entirely. 2 years ago, Imari's mother, Melissa, needed extensive dental implants. The cost was a staggering $18,000. Her insurance covered only a fraction. Dorian watched Melissa, a proud, church-going woman, grow withdrawn and sad, ashamed of her failing teeth. He sat down with Imari in their sunroom, the afternoon light glinting off the glass. "I can't stand to see your mom like this," he had said. He pulled out his checkbook. "Let's just take care of it." He wrote a check for $12,000 from his personal savings, the bulk of the remaining cost. Imari had cried, hugging him tight. "You are the most generous man I have ever known," she'd whispered into his chest. He remembered the feeling of her arms around him, the genuine gratitude in her voice. He had felt like a good husband, a good son-in-law. Then there was Trevon. Trevon was a perpetual project. He drifted between jobs, call centers, retail management, a failed attempt at a t-shirt business. His financial emergencies were as regular as the seasons. In 2019, it was his transmission. He called Imari, frantic. His 2012 Honda Civic was his lifeline to his job. The repair was $2,400. Dorian, overhearing the panicked call, had simply told Imari to give her brother his credit card number. He paid it off the next month. There was no grand thank you, just a text from Trevon. Good looking out. In the summer of 2021, Trevon decided he wanted to be a real estate agent. The licensing course and exam fees totaled $950. Dorian paid for it. An investment in his future, he'd said to Imari, who beamed at him. Trevon passed the course but failed the exam twice and gave up, the $950 vanishing into the ether of his abandoned ambitions. There were smaller things too, a constant stream of financial aid. The $500 he'd given Imari's younger sister for her college textbooks last fall. The plane tickets for her aunt to fly in from Atlanta for Thanksgiving, a $480 expense. The $2,000 he'd contributed to a family cruise in 2018, a vacation he couldn't even attend because of a major project at work. He'd insisted they go without him. Each transaction was a brick in the foundation of his role in the family. He was the provider, the reliable one, the man behind the curtain who made things happen. He never kept a tally. He never thought he needed to. The love and inclusion he felt he was receiving in return was payment enough. The Christmas Eve comment and Imari's echoing silence had taken that entire 6-year history of generosity and recast it. It wasn't generosity they saw. It was obligation, or worse, a payment for his right to exist in their circle. He had been paying a fee for a membership that came with no real benefits, only the illusion of belonging. And the price had just become far too high. The 2 weeks that followed Christmas were the coldest of Dorian's life. They unfolded inside the warm, tastefully decorated walls of his Myers Park home, a space that now felt like a beautifully appointed prison. The betrayal wasn't a single, explosive event. It was a lingering poison that contaminated everything. Imari's silence on Christmas Eve had been the initial wound, but her behavior in the days after was the infection that set in, turning the injury septic. She acted as if nothing had happened. The day after Christmas, she was bright and cheerful, suggesting they go see a movie. She tried to take his hand as they walked down the hallway. "Let's go to the Regal at Philip's Place," she suggested, her voice light. "We can get that popcorn with the extra butter you like." Dorian felt his arms stiffen, an involuntary recoiling. He pulled his hand away gently. "I'm not really in the mood," he said, his voice flat. He retreated to his home office, a small room at the back of the house, overlooking the garden he had so carefully cultivated. She followed him to the doorway, leaning against the frame. She was wearing a pair of $120 Lululemon leggings and one of his old sweatshirts. "What's wrong with you? You've been quiet ever since we left my sister's house?" Here it was, the opening, the chance for her to see, to acknowledge, to apologize. He turned in his leather office chair, a $900 piece he'd bought himself as a promotion gift. "You don't know what's wrong?" he asked, keeping his tone even. "You really have no idea?" Imari sighed, a sound of pure exasperation. It was a sound he was beginning to hate. "Oh my God, are you seriously still upset about what Trevon said?" "Dorian, you know how he is. He was just joking. He has a stupid sense of humor." "A joke?" Dorian repeated the word, letting it hang in the air between them. 18 people were there, Imari. Your entire family. He said, "I live off you." And you said nothing. Not a word. What was I supposed to do? Make a big scene at Christmas? Ruin the whole night? She said, her voice rising. It would have been so embarrassing. You're being overly sensitive. Overly sensitive. The words were a dismissal, a complete invalidation of the public humiliation he had felt. He had been stripped of his dignity in front of her entire clan, and she was calling him sensitive for bleeding. So your solution was to let everyone in that room, including your brother, believe it's true? Nobody believes it's true, Dorian. They know you have a good job, she shot back, crossing her arms. This was her tell. When she got defensive, she tried to make him the unreasonable one. Do they? He asked, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Because it got pretty quiet in there. And you? You stood there in a dress I paid for, next to a tree I paid for, in a home someone else was paying for, holding a drink I bought, and you let him say it. You let them all think it. Your silence was an endorsement, Imari. She stared at him, her beautiful face hardening. The warmth was gone, replaced by a cool annoyance. You know, this is exactly why I didn't say anything. Because you get like this. You make everything a huge deal. It was a dumb comment. It's over. Let it go. She turned and walked away. The soft patter of her slippers on the hardwood floor sounding like a retreat. That was their last real conversation about it. For the next 13 days, a glacial silence descended. They moved around each other like ghosts in the 2,200 square feet of their shared space. They slept in the same king-sized bed, a $4,000 Tempur-Pedic, a chasm of 6 inches between them that felt like a mile. He'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the scene. The faces, Trevon's smug grin, his mother-in-law's passive stare, and Imari's blankness. The blankness was the worst part. It was a void where her loyalty should have been. He started to see the past differently. Every past slight, every time she had taken her family's side in a minor disagreement, now seemed like a clue he had missed. He remembered a conversation from a year ago. He had been complaining about Trevon asking for another small loan, this time for $300 to fix his phone screen. "He's just trying to get on his feet," Imari had said, a familiar refrain. "We have to support him. It's what family does." "We?" Dorian had asked, a bit sharply. "Imari, that money comes from my paycheck. When was the last time we supported him with money from your account?" She had bristled instantly. "Wow, I can't believe you're throwing that in my face. It's our money, Dorian. Or is it just yours? Is that how you see it?" To keep the peace, he had backed down. "No, of course not. It's ours," he'd said, hating the weakness in his own voice. He had transferred the $300. Now he realized she had been manipulating him for years, using the concept of our money to channel his money to her family, while simultaneously allowing them to believe he was some kind of dependent. It was a breathtakingly cruel and effective strategy. The cruelty became more acute in the small moments. One evening, about a week after Christmas, he was in the kitchen making dinner. He was just trying to maintain a sliver of normalcy. Imari walked in on the phone with her sister. Her voice was bright, animated. "No, he's just being moody," she said, and he knew she was talking about him. "Yeah, still. I don't know what his problem is. Anyway, did you see the new collection at Nordstrom?" She glanced at him, her eyes cold and dismissive, before turning her back to him and walking out of the room, still deep in her conversation. He stood over the sizzling pan, the smell of garlic and onions filling the air, and felt a profound sense of erasure. He wasn't a person with legitimate feelings. He was a problem, a mood to be waited out. He was an inconvenience in her life, a resource whose feelings were secondary to her comfort and her family's perception. The outrage didn't scream. It accumulated. It was a quiet, crushing weight, building day by day in the silent house. He felt like he was holding his breath, waiting for a crack in her armor, a moment of apology that never came. Instead, what he got was more of the same: dismissiveness, annoyance, and a complete refusal to acknowledge the wound she had inflicted with her silence. The woman he had vowed to build a life with had revealed herself to be the architect of his humiliation. And he was beginning to understand that the only way to survive was to start drawing up his own blueprints for a new life. One that didn't include her. The decision not to confront Imari again was not an act of surrender. It was a strategic retreat. After their last disastrous conversation, Dorian realized that words were useless. Arguing with her was like punching water. It offered a moment of resistance and then settled back into the same shape, with him being the one who was overly sensitive or making a big deal. Her reality was immutable, so he would build his own. And his would be based on facts, not feelings. His would be built on numbers. While he moved through his days in a state of feigned normalcy, going to the gym, eating the dinner she sometimes cooked, offering one-word answers to her questions, his nights became a covert operation. After Imari went to bed, usually around 10:30 p.m., Scrolling through Instagram on her $1,200 iPhone, Dorian would slip into his home office and close the door. The clicks of the lock sliding into place were the only sounds he allowed himself. He sat in front of his dual 27-inch Dell monitors, the glow illuminating his focused expression. He was a man in his element. For years, he had analyzed complex financial instruments for the bank. Now he was applying that same forensic skill to the last 6 years of his own life. He opened a new Excel spreadsheet. He named the file simply Contributions. The first tab he labeled Family Support. He began to scroll back through years of his online bank statements and credit card bills. It was a painful, meticulous archaeology of his own generosity. Each line item was a small memory, now tainted. Date: March 15, 2019. Payee: Precision Auto Repair. Amount: $2,412.55. Memo: Trevon Civic Transmission. He remembered the relief in Imari's voice when he'd agreed to cover it. He had felt like a hero. Now he just felt like a fool. Date: August 22nd, 2021. Payee: Superior School of Real Estate. Amount: $950. Memo: Trevon Licensing Course. He remembered the conversation about investing in his future, the future that never materialized. He kept digging, the hours melting away. His fingers flew across the keyboard, a quiet tap, tap, tap in the silent house. Date: June 10th, 2022. Payee: Dr. Alistair Finch, DDS. Amount: $12,000. Memo: Melissa Bridgman Implant. Procedure: wire transfer. This one stung the most. He had done it out of genuine care for his mother-in-law. The woman who had sat there on Christmas Eve, her expensive new teeth chewing on the ham he'd paid for, and watched him be disrespected with a placid, unbothered expression. He created columns for date, payee, amount, and purpose. The list grew longer and longer. Flights for Aunt Clara. Christmas 2020, $421.80. Contribution to family vacation, 2018, $2,000. Ashley Furniture, 2021, new bed for Trevon's daughter, $788. Verizon Wireless, paying Trevon's bill for 3 months in 2022, $285.45. Cash App to Imari's sister, textbooks, $500. By 2 a.m., the total at the bottom of the column was a number that made him physically sick. Over 6 years, he had given Imari's family a documented $38,742.80. This didn't include the uncountable cash withdrawals for birthdays, the graduation gifts, the times he'd picked up a dinner tab for a crowd of them. That was just the traceable, undeniable proof. He created a second tab, Household Expenses, D. Harris. He meticulously logged the mortgage payments, the property tax, the homeowner's insurance, the utilities, the landscaping service, the pest control. He had the statements going back years. The total was astronomical. In the 6 years they had been married, he had personally spent over $280,000 just keeping the roof over their heads and the lights on. A third tab was titled Household Expenses, I. Bridgman. He searched their joint account, the one they used for shared costs like date nights and vacations. He found her bi-weekly direct deposits from the non-profit. They were paltry. Then he tracked her spending. A $180 charge at Neiman Marcus, a $250 spa day at the Ballantine, a $400 weekend trip to Asheville with her friends. Her money was for her, his money was for them, and for her family. Each number he typed was a quiet act of rebellion. It was the antidote to overly sensitive. Numbers didn't have feelings. Numbers couldn't be dismissed. A spreadsheet couldn't be gaslit. During the day, he played his part. Imari would ask, "What are you working on so late in there?" as she got ready for work. applying her $60 Chanel foundation in the bathroom mirror. "Just some stuff for the office," he'd reply, his voice even. "Year-end reports. You know how it is." It wasn't a complete lie. He was preparing a year-end report, the year of his marriage. One morning, she came to him with her laptop, a sleek MacBook Air he'd bought her for her birthday 2 years prior, $1,199. "Honey, can you look at this? I want to book a trip for my birthday in March. I was thinking maybe Cancun? This all-inclusive looks amazing." She showed him a package from a luxury resort. The cost was $5,800 for 5 nights. He looked at the screen, at the pictures of white sand beaches and turquoise water. A year ago, he would have said yes without hesitation. He would have been excited to plan it with her. Now he felt nothing but a cold, hollow ache. He looked at her, her face expectant and bright. She had no idea she was a ghost, asking a dead man to plan a vacation. "It looks nice," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "We can talk about it later." She frowned, sensing the distance but misinterpreting its depth. "Okay. Well, don't wait too long. The prices might go up." He just nodded. "I won't." He had no intention of talking about it later. He had no intention of going to Cancun. The only trip he was planning was a journey to freedom. And his ticket was this spreadsheet, this monument to a one-sided partnership, this undeniable, multi-tabbed, perfectly calculated declaration of independence. He was gathering his evidence, not for a fight with her, but for a clean, swift amputation. The call came on January 8th, a Tuesday night. It was 11:03 p.m. Rain lashed against the windows of Dorian's office, a relentless, percussive drumming that matched the unease that had settled deep in his bones for the past 2 weeks. He was finalizing his spreadsheet, cross-referencing a credit card statement from 2020. The final tally of his direct financial support to Imari's family had just crossed the $40,000 mark. He felt a grim, hollow satisfaction in the number. It was obscene. It was liberating. His phone, a company-issued iPhone 13, buzzed on the desk beside him, the screen lighting up with a name he had come to despise, Trevon Bridgman. For a moment, he considered not answering. Let it go to voicemail. What could he possibly want at this hour? But a cold, sharp curiosity, an instinct honed from years of analyzing risk, told him to pick it up. This was an anomaly. A late-night call was a distress signal. He let it ring 3 times, a small assertion of control, before tapping the green icon. He didn't speak. He just listened. "Dorian? Dorian? You there? Man, pick up." Trevon's voice was a ragged, high-pitched mess. The usual swagger was gone, replaced by a raw, undiluted panic. He sounded like he was running, his breath coming in short, desperate gasps. "I'm here, Trevon," Dorian said, his own voice unnervingly calm in contrast. "Oh, thank God. Man, I'm so sorry to call you this late. I swear I wouldn't. But I don't know who else to call. Imari isn't answering her phone. I think she's asleep." Dorian glanced toward the hallway. Imari had taken a sleeping pill an hour ago, complaining of a headache. She was lost to the world in their king-sized bed, oblivious. "What's wrong?" Dorian asked, the question purely functional. "It's Maya," Trevon choked out, his voice cracking. Maya was his 8-year-old daughter. She has this rare blood disorder. We've been managing it, but she had a crisis tonight. Her spleen, something about her spleen. They had to rush her to the ER. Now they're saying she needs to be admitted to the ICU, and she needs a specialist, a hematologist, but the best one, the one the doctor here says she has to see, is out of network. The words tumbled out in a frantic torrent. Dorian listened, his face impassive. He pictured little Maya, a bright girl with beads in her braids that clicked when she ran. He felt a pang of genuine concern for the child, an innocent in all of this. But that concern was a separate entity, quarantined from the man on the other end of the line. "They won't admit her to the specialist wing without a deposit," Trevin was saying, his voice now a desperate whisper. "My insurance is crap, you know that. It won't cover it. They want $80,000, Dorian. They want an $80,000 deposit to save my little girl's life." He was openly sobbing now, a gut-wrenching, ugly sound. "I don't have it. I don't have anything close to it. I called my mom, she's got nothing. My sister, her savings are gone. I don't know what to do. I'm going to lose my baby." Dorian sat there in the quiet of his office, the rain still beating against the glass. He heard the number, $80,000. It was a life-altering sum of money. He could do it. The thought was immediate and clinical. He had that much and more in a Vanguard brokerage account. A few clicks, a wire transfer. He could solve this man's world-shattering problem in less than 5 minutes. And in that moment of clinical assessment, the true discovery was made. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about Maya's health, as terrible as that was. It was about the fact that Trevon, in his moment of ultimate desperation, had called him, not as a brother, not as family, but as a last resort financial instrument. After publicly branding him a freeloader, a man who lived off his sister, Trevin was now coming to him, hand out, for a sum of money that dwarfed every dollar his sister had ever earned in a year. The hypocrisy was so vast, so profound, it was almost sublime. It was the final piece of evidence. This was how they saw him. Not as a man, not as a husband or a brother-in-law. He was a vault, a resource to be tapped. His value to them was not his character, his love, or his presence. It was the number in his bank account. The Christmas insult wasn't a joke or a slip of the tongue. It was a strategic repositioning. By labeling him as dependent on Imari, they were asserting a familial claim on his resources, laundered through her. They had made him a subsidiary of their family corporation. He looked at the spreadsheet on his screen, the long list of his contributions. It was all there. The foundation for this very moment had been laid over 6 years of him writing checks and them cashing them. He had trained them to see him this way. "Dorian, please, man, say something," Trevin begged, his voice thin with terror. "I'll pay you back, every single penny. I'll work 3 jobs. I'll sign anything. Please, don't let my baby die." Dorian took a slow, deep breath. The rain outside seemed to soften. The world came into sharp, crystalline focus. He knew exactly what he was going to do. The day after the phone call, Dorian moved with a quiet, deliberate purpose that felt entirely new. The emotional storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape of stark, cold clarity. He was no longer a victim of their perception. He was an agent of his own reality. At 7:15 a.m., he emailed his manager at the bank, informing him he needed to take a personal day. Then, he went online and did something he hadn't done in 7 years. He searched for a divorce attorney. He didn't look for the biggest firm or the flashiest name. He looked for precision and reputation. He found what he was looking for in a boutique firm located on the top floor of a sleek glass tower on South Tryon Street. The lead partner was a woman named Eleanor Hayes, a highly respected black attorney known for her discretion and her sharp, no-nonsense approach to complex asset division. Her online profile said her rate was $750 per hour. Dorian booked a consultation for 2 p.m. that same day. The $500 consultation fee he paid online with his personal Amex felt like the best money he had ever spent. He spent the morning preparing. He printed his spreadsheet, contributions, all 3 tabs. The pages felt heavy in his hands, a dense record of his folly. He printed the deed to his Myers Park house. clearly showing the purchase date 2 years before his marriage. He printed the last 6 months of statements from his 401k and his brokerage account, which together held just over $1.2 million, the result of 15 years of aggressive saving and shrewd investing. He placed everything into a crisp, new leather portfolio he'd bought for $300 years ago and rarely used. At 1:45 p.m., he walked into the lobby of Ms. Hayes's building. The air was cool and smelled faintly of money and cleaning solution. He rode the silent, high-speed elevator to the 40th floor. Her office was corner suite with a panoramic view of the city, from the Panthers Stadium to the west to the skyline of his own office building to the east. It was a landscape of power, and she was at its apex. Eleanor Hayes was in her early 50s, with her natural hair styled in elegant, silver-streaked twists. She wore a perfectly tailored navy blue suit that probably cost more than his first car, maybe $4,500. She stood up when he entered, shook his hand firmly, and gestured for him to sit. Her eyes were intelligent and missed nothing. "Mr. Harris," she began, her voice smooth and professional. "Thank you for coming in. Your intake form was brief. It just said, 'Seeking dissolution of marriage due to irreconcilable differences.' That can mean a lot of things. Why don't you tell me what's really going on?" Dorian didn't waste time with emotion. He simply opened his portfolio on her vast mahogany desk. "6 years ago, I married a woman named Imari Bridgman," he started, his voice steady. "We live in a house I purchased and paid for before our marriage. This is the deed." He slid the document across the desk. She picked it up, her eyes scanning it quickly. "Myers Park. Premarital asset. Good. What else?" "For the duration of our marriage, I have been the sole financial provider for our household and a significant financial contributor to her extended family." He passed her the spreadsheet. "I compiled a summary. Tab 1 is direct, documented support to her family. Tab 2 is a breakdown of my contributions to household expenses. Tab 3 is an analysis of her contributions." Ms. Hayes put on a pair of sleek, black-framed glasses and began to read. Dorian remained silent. He watched her expression. It didn't change, but he saw a subtle tightening at the corner of her mouth as she scanned the list of payments to Trevin, the dental work for the mother, the endless small drains on his income. She spent a full 3 minutes reading, flipping through the pages. The only sound was the rustle of paper and the distant hum of the city below. Finally, she looked up, taking her glasses off. "Mr. Harris, in 25 years of practicing family law, I have seen many things, but I have rarely seen a case of financial exploitation documented with this level of detail. This is meticulous." "I'm an analyst," Dorian said simply. "Clearly," she replied, a hint of a smile on her lips. She leaned back in her chair. "So, what happened? What was the precipitating event?" Dorian recounted the Christmas Eve incident, keeping his tone factual. He described Trevin's comment and Imari's silence. Then, he told her about the phone call from the night before. The desperate plea for $80,000. "And what was your response?" she asked, her gaze sharp. "I told him, I live off your sister. You should ask her." Then I hung up the phone. Eleanor Hayes's smile was no longer just a hint. It was a full, appreciative grin. "Excellent," she said. "Clean. Direct. It establishes a clear boundary based on their own stated terms. I like it." She leaned forward, all business again. "All right, Dorian, here is the plan. North Carolina is an equitable distribution state. That means marital property is divided fairly, which doesn't always mean 50-50. Your premarital home is your separate property. We will file a motion to ensure it is classified as such. Your retirement accounts accrued before the marriage are also separate. Any value accrued during the marriage is marital property, But given this documented history of financial dissipation on her part, and believe me, funneling nearly $40,000 to her family without your full, informed consent is dissipation. We can argue for you to receive a larger share. I don't want to fight, Dorian said. I just want it to be over. I want to protect what is mine, and I want a clean break. The best way to avoid a fight is to be overwhelmingly prepared for one, she countered. We will draft the separation agreement and the divorce complaint simultaneously. We will offer her a settlement. It will be fair, but it will not be generous. It will account for her contributions, such as they are, to the marital partnership. It will not reward her for her silence or her family's entitlement. We will give her a deadline to accept. If she refuses, we file and we litigate. And we will use this, she tapped the spreadsheet, as Exhibit A. Dorian felt a wave of relief, so profound it was almost dizzying. He was no longer alone in this. He had an ally, a strategist. He had a plan. What about her living situation? She will need to vacate the property. We will give her 30 days and a one-time payment of, say, $10,000 for moving expenses and a rental deposit, contingent on her signing the agreement. That is more than reasonable. He nodded. It was more than reasonable. It was merciful. He left her office an hour later, his step lighter than it had been in years. He had walked in feeling like a man whose life was in ruins. He walked out, feeling like an architect with a new set of blueprints. The strategy was set. The pieces were in place. All that was left was the execution. The strike began with a single, quiet sentence, delivered into a telephone at 11:08 p.m. on a rainy Tuesday night. It was the culmination of 2 weeks of silent suffering and 6 years of misguided generosity. Dorian, please, man, say something. Trevin's voice crackled with static and desperation from the hospital hallway. I'll pay you back. Every single penny. I'll work 3 jobs. I'll sign anything. Please, don't let my baby die. Dorian held the phone to his ear, his posture perfectly still. In his mind's eye, he saw the entire tableau of Christmas Eve. The 18 faces, the smug look on Trayvon's, the utter blankness on Imari's. He heard the ghost of Trayvon's voice, loud and clear in the festive room. We all know you just live off my sister, man. He let the silence stretch for 5 long seconds, a small eternity for the desperate man on the other end. Then he spoke. His voice was not angry. It was not cruel. It was perfectly calm, as if he were stating a simple, undeniable fact. Trayvon, he said, the name a cold, hard stone in the air. I can't help you. What? What do you mean you can't help me? Dorian, it's Maya. I heard you, Dorian continued, his tone unchanged. The problem is, as you pointed out in front of our entire family on Christmas Eve, I live off your sister. I don't have any money of my own. You should ask her for the $80,000. There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. It was the sound of a man's reality crashing into a wall he himself had built. What? What are you talking about? That was a joke, man. I was just messing around. You know that. No, Dorian said, and the finality in that single word was absolute. I don't know that. What I know is what you said, and what I know is that my wife, your sister, stood right there and didn't correct you. So that must be the truth. Ask Imari. And with that, he pressed the red icon on his screen, ending the call. He placed the phone face down on his desk. The silence in the office was immense. The rain had stopped. He felt nothing. Not triumph, not anger, not sadness. Just a profound, hollow emptiness. The calm at the center of the storm. It took less than a minute. He heard a frantic scrambling from the master bedroom, then the thud of feet on the hardwood floor. The door to his office was flung open. Imari stood there, her face a mask of sleep-creased confusion and rising panic. She was clutching her phone. "What did you do?" she demanded, her voice thick with sleep and fury. "Trevon just called me, hysterical. He said you hung up on him. Dorian, Maya's in the ICU. She needs an emergency procedure." Dorian swiveled in his chair to face her. He looked at her, really looked at her, as if for the first time. He saw the woman who had stood by and let him be humiliated, now demanding he fulfill the very role she had allowed her family to mock. "I know," he said calmly. "He called me first." "He called you? And you hung up on him? Are you insane?" she shrieked, taking a step into the room. "He needs money, Dorian. A lot of money. He needs $80,000. "I'm aware of the amount," he said. "Then what is wrong with you? We have to help him. This is my niece. This is my family." Dorian leaned back in his chair, his hands resting on the armrests. He felt a strange, chilling sense of detachment. "That's where you're mistaken," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "There is no we. There is you and there is me, and I live off you. Remember?" Imari's face went white. The color drained away, leaving her skin looking ashen under the warm office light. She finally understood. This wasn't about a mood. This wasn't him being sensitive. This was a reckoning. "You can't be serious," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You're going to hold that stupid comment against my dying niece? That's monstrous." The comment wasn't the sickness, Imari. It was a symptom of the disease. The disease is a lack of respect, a lack of partnership, a complete and total misunderstanding of who I am and what I have provided for you and for them, he said, his voice as sharp and clean as a scalpel. "Trevon called me because he thinks I'm a bank. And you let him think that. You all did. So the bank is closed, permanently." Her phone buzzed in her hand, then again, and again. A torrent of notifications. Dorian's phone, still face down on the desk, began to vibrate, a low, angry hum against the wood. The digital assault had begun. "You have to call him back," Imari pleaded, tears now streaming down her face. "Dorian, please, I'm begging you, I'm sorry. Okay? I'm sorry I didn't say anything. It was stupid. I was wrong. Please, just call him. We can talk about this later." Her apology, so long withheld, was now offered up as a desperate transaction. It meant nothing. It was a key she was trying to use on a lock he had already changed. "There is nothing to talk about," Dorian said. He stood up, towering over her. "You should take that call. Your family needs you." He walked past her, out of the office, and into the guest bedroom at the opposite end of the house. He closed the door, locked it, and lay down on the bed, fully clothed. He could hear her muffled sobs and frantic pacing through the wall. His phone continued to vibrate on the desk in the other room, a distant, ignored plea. He closed his eyes. For the first time in 6 years, he felt a sense of profound, unassailable peace. The strike was complete. The fallout was just beginning. The consequences of Dorian's single, quiet act of rebellion did not arrive like a thunderclap. They cascaded one after another, a series of dominoes toppling in the lives of those who had taken him for granted. Dorian did not orchestrate their downfall. He simply stepped aside and allowed them to collide with the reality of their own choices. The first and most immediate consequence fell upon Trevon and his daughter, Maya. Without Dorian's $80,000, they were left scrambling. Imari, as Dorian knew from his financial reconnaissance, had less than $2,000 in her personal savings account. Their mother, Melissa, was on a fixed income. The rest of the 18 relatives who had witnessed the Christmas Eve humiliation were a chorus of, "I wish I could help," but they offered prayers and sympathy, but their bank accounts remained closed. Trevon was forced to make an impossible choice. He couldn't access the top-tier specialist. Maya was admitted to the standard pediatric ICU at the public hospital, a fine facility, but not the one with the leading expert her doctor had recommended. She received good care, and thankfully, she stabilized after 3 harrowing days. But the crisis had exposed the fragility of their lives. To cover the co-pays and the out-of-pocket expenses that his meager insurance wouldn't touch, Trevon had to take out a high-interest emergency loan for $25,000 from a predatory online lender. The interest rate was a crippling 29.99%. That debt would now hang over his head for years, a constant, crushing reminder of the night he called the wrong person for help. The $80,000 problem became a long-term $25,000 anchor that would drag him down for the next decade. The second consequence was for Imari. The day after the phone call, at precisely 2:45 p.m., a courier arrived at the Myers Park house. He delivered a thick legal envelope addressed to Imari Bridgman Harris. Inside was a letter from Eleanor Hayes, a formal notice of separation, and a draft of a divorce settlement. The terms were brutal in their fairness. It acknowledged her as a partner in the marriage, but offered no reward for her disloyalty. She was to vacate the premarital property within 30 days. She would receive a one-time lump sum payment of $10,000 to assist with relocation. She could keep her Lexus RX, provided she assumed the remaining $27,000 of the loan payments herself. Her claim on his retirement and brokerage accounts was nullified by the argument of financial dissipation, with evidence attached, a summary page of the contributions spreadsheet. She was given 10 business days to sign, or they would file for a contested divorce and litigate. Imari crumbled. She had lived a life cushioned by his income for so long, she had forgotten what financial reality felt like. She called him, weeping. He didn't answer. She sent a barrage of texts. Imari, 10:12 a.m. Dorian, we need to talk. I got a letter from some lawyer. Imari, 10:45 a.m. You can't just kick me out of my home. This is my home too. Imari, 1:20 p.m. I can't afford this car payment on my own. You know that. Imari, 3 p.m. You are destroying my life over one stupid comment. Imari, 5:15 p.m. I love you. Please don't do this. Dorian read the messages and felt a distant pity, but no regret. He forwarded them all to Eleanor Hayes, who simply replied, stay the course. Imari consulted a lawyer of her own, a man who charged her a $1,500 retainer she had to borrow from her sister. After reviewing the documents Dorian's team had prepared, her lawyer gave her the cold, hard truth. They had her cornered. The premarital status of the house was ironclad. The documentation of his financial support and her family's dependence was overwhelming. A court battle would be long, expensive, and she would almost certainly lose, potentially ending up with even less. On the 9th day, she signed the papers. 3 weeks later, Dorian watched from his living room window as a U-Haul truck, a small 10-foot one that cost $19.95 plus mileage, pulled up to the curb. He saw Imari and Trevon, their faces grim and tired, loading her life into cardboard boxes. The designer clothes, the art books, the shoe collection. She didn't move into a stylish apartment in South End. She moved into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in University City, a $1,300 a month unit with thin walls and a view of a parking lot, splitting the rent with Trevon to make ends meet. She had to sell the Lexus RX at a $5,000 loss just to get out from under the loan. And she bought a 10-year-old Nissan Sentra for $8,000 in cash. Her life, once accessorized with luxury, was now defined by necessity. The final consequence was social. The family was fractured. The brother who had made the joke and the sister who had enabled it were now living together, their lives diminished. The incident became a forbidden topic, a source of immense shame and division. Some relatives blamed Trevon for his arrogance. Others quietly blamed Imari for her silence. A few even whispered that Dorian had been cruel, but none of them could deny the central truth. Their collective sense of entitlement had been met with a consequence they never anticipated. The family ATM was closed, and they were all poorer for it. Dorian hadn't just divorced his wife. He had divorced her entire family, leaving them to grapple with the mess they themselves had created. 1 year later, the world looked different. The change was not in the landscape itself. The Charlotte skyline still pierced the Carolina blue sky, but in the way Dorian inhabited it. The storm had passed, leaving a clean, quiet stillness in its wake. His house in Myers Park was no longer a stage for a fractured marriage. It was a sanctuary. He had systematically purged the last remnants of Imari's presence. The guest room, once her dressing room overflowing with clothes, was now a dedicated library. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves he had built himself held volumes on financial history, Stoic philosophy, and biographies of great leaders. The master bedroom, once a cold and silent battlefield, was now his alone. The king-size Tempur-Pedic was gone, replaced by a simple, sturdy queen bed with a firm mattress. He slept better than he had in years. The air in the house felt lighter, cleaner. It smelled of old books, fresh coffee, and lemon oil from the polish he used on the hardwood floors. His work at the bank continued, but his relationship with his wealth had been fundamentally altered. The numbers on his screen were no longer just tools for accumulation or for funding someone else's life. They were instruments of purpose. He had started a mentorship program. Twice a month, he met with a group of 4 young, ambitious black men and women who were just starting their careers in finance. They were graduates from Johnson C. Smith University and UNC Charlotte, bright kids with immense potential, but no roadmap for navigating the corporate world. He met them in a conference room he booked at the main library uptown. He didn't just teach them about market analysis or portfolio diversification. He taught them about building financial foundations, about the importance of prenuptial agreements, about the difference between generosity and subsidization. He taught them how to say no. He shared his own story, not the bitter details, but the hard-won lessons. He was giving them the armor he had been forced to forge for himself in the fire. Seeing their confidence grow, watching them secure better positions and negotiate higher salaries, brought him a satisfaction more profound than any bonus he had ever received. He wasn't just building his own wealth anymore. He was building a legacy of financial literacy in his community. One crisp Saturday afternoon in late autumn, Dorian was walking through Freedom Park. The sunlight, golden and soft, filtered through the thinning leaves of the willow oaks. He was wearing a simple pair of jeans, a comfortable Henley, and a pair of $120 Allbirds. He walked with no destination in mind, simply enjoying the feeling of the solid ground beneath his feet. As he rounded a bend in the path near the duck pond, he saw her, Imari. She was sitting alone on a park bench, throwing small pieces of a bread heel to the ducks. She looked smaller than he remembered. Her hair was still in locks, but they seemed less vibrant. She was wearing a simple coat from Old Navy, a far cry from the designer labels she once favored. She looked up and saw him. For a moment, her face registered a flicker of panic. Then it settled into a weary resignation. He could have turned and walked away. A year ago, he would have. Instead, he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod and continued walking toward her. He stopped a few feet from the bench. "Hello, Imari," he said. His voice was gentle, devoid of the cold precision it had held during their last encounters. "Dorian," she said, her voice barely a whisper, I didn't expect to see you." "It's a nice day for a walk," he said, keeping the conversation neutral. They stood in silence for a moment, the only sound the quacking of the ducks. "Maya is doing well," she offered. "Her new doctor is amazing. Trevon is working a second job at night to pay for it all. He's changed." "I'm glad to hear she's well," Dorian said, and he meant it. Imari looked down at her hands, then back up at him. Her eyes were filled with a sadness that seemed to have settled deep into her bones. "I know it's too late," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "and I know sorry doesn't fix anything. But I'm sorry, Dorian. Not just for what I did, but for who I was. I was a taker. I never understood what you gave because I was too busy counting what I was getting. I was a fool." Dorian listened. He heard the words, and for the first time he believed them. The apology wasn't a transaction. It was a confession. He looked at the woman on the bench, a person stripped of the wealth and status she had once clung to, and he felt no anger. He felt no triumph. He felt only a quiet, empathetic sorrow for the life she had chosen and the lessons she had learned in the hardest way possible. "I forgive you, Imari," he said softly. And the forgiveness wasn't for her. It was for him. It was the final act of letting go, the last piece of baggage he needed to set down so he could walk away truly free. "I hope you find your peace." She nodded, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "You too, Dorian." He turned and continued his walk, not looking back. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the grass. He felt the warmth on his skin and the cool autumn air in his lungs. He had learned that true wealth isn't measured by a bank balance or the things you can buy. It's measured in self-respect. It's the solid foundation of your own character, a home that no one can take from you, and the quiet peace of a life lived with integrity. You can lose a spouse, a family, a fortune, but as long as you don't lose yourself, you haven't lost a thing. Every one of us has a line that can't be crossed, a moment where we have to choose our own self-respect over everything else. What's your line? Let us know in the comments what you've learned about the value of walking away. Your story might be the blueprint someone else needs to start building their own foundation. Thank you for listening, and remember to subscribe to Love Beyond Pride for more stories of strength, resilience, and the quiet triumph of the human spirit.